I am 32 years old, and for every single one of those years, I have lived in my brother's shadow. It was a comfortable shadow in some ways, cool and quiet. No one expected much from me, which meant I was free to do the actual work. While my brother, Mark, was the face of our family's construction company, I was the engine. I handled the books, the payroll, the scheduling, and the endless paperwork that made the whole operation run. My dad, Richard, saw Mark as his successor. He saw me as his helpful daughter. The distinction was as clear as it was painful. The retirement party was the peak of this dynamic. It was held at a local country club, the kind of place my father loved. It smelled of old leather and new money. Everyone who mattered in our small town was there. Developers, city council members, old family friends. They were all there to celebrate my father's legacy and, by extension, to welcome Mark as the new king. I stood near the back, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching the performance. Mark was brilliant at this. He moved through the crowd with an easy smile, a firm handshake for the men, a charming word for the women. He looked the part of a leader. He had always looked the part. My mother, Helen, found me by the dessert table. She patted my arm, her smile a little too tight. "Isn't this a wonderful evening, Anna?" she asked. "It's very nice, Mom," I said. "Your father is so proud," she continued, her eyes following Mark as he laughed with the mayor. "He's worked his whole life for this moment." To see Mark ready to take over. I just nodded. There was no point in saying anything else. There never was. My mother lived in a world where everything was pleasant as long as you didn't look too closely. She saw the perfect son, the perfect husband, the perfect life. Any information to the contrary was an unwelcome intrusion. I had learned long ago not to intrude, so I just stood there, a ghost at my own family's celebration. Then came the speech. My father stood at the podium, his voice thick with emotion. He thanked his employees, his clients, his friends. He thanked my mother for her unwavering support. He was a good man, my father, a man of integrity and hard work. But he had one blind. He looked directly at Mark, his eyes shining. There were times I thought we wouldn't make it. Tough years, lean years. But through it all, there was one thing I never had to worry about. He paused for effect, letting the moment hang in the air. "I knew I could only count on you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not a loud, sharp crack, but a dull, heavy thud that knocked the air from my lungs. "I could only count on you." He said it to Mark, but the words were for me. They were a summary of my entire existence in his eyes. I was the other one, the one he couldn't count on. The applause this time was thunderous. People were on their feet. Mark stepped forward and hugged our father, a perfect tableau of paternal pride and filial devotion. I felt my face grow hot. I needed to get out of there. I turned and walked toward the exit, my movements stiff and robotic. No one noticed me leave. Why would they? The main event was at the front of the room. I slipped out onto the cool patio, the manicured lawns of the golf course stretching out before me in the twilight. The distant sound of clapping felt like an accusation. I leaned against the stone railing, taking deep breaths. It wasn't fair. The unfairness of it was what hurt the most. I wasn't jealous of Mark's charm or his easy confidence. I was angry about the lie that he was the dependable one. I was the one who stayed late to reconcile the accounts when they didn't add up. I was the one who fielded angry calls from subcontractors when Mark forgot to approve their payments. I was the one who made sure our employees' health insurance was paid on time. I was the bedrock, the quiet foundation upon which Mark danced. And my father had never seen it. A few minutes later, the door opened and Mark stepped out. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne. He looked triumphant. "There you are," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "hiding in the shadows as usual." He offered me a glass. I shook my head. "What's wrong, Anna?" he asked, taking a sip from his own glass. "Can't you be happy for me?" "For Dad? I'm thrilled for Dad," I said, my voice flat. "He deserves to retire." "And for me?" he prodded.
Hierarchy.
He was the star, and I was the stagehand. He should have thanked you too, Mark added, a weak attempt at a peace offering. I'll mention it to him. Don't, I said sharply. Don't do me any favors. His eyes narrowed. Fine. Be like that. Sulk out here all night if you want. But tomorrow morning, I'm the boss, and you'd do well to remember that. He turned and went back inside, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the party and the cold, hard weight of my father's words. Something inside me shifted that night. A line had been crossed. For years, I had swallowed the unfairness for the sake of peace. I had protected my father from the small truths about Mark's carelessness, his corner cutting, his little white lies. I had smoothed things over, fixed his mistakes, and covered his tracks, all to maintain the perfect family picture my parents cherished. But as I stood there in the dark, I made a decision. I was done. I was done being the silent fixer. I was done protecting Mark from himself, and I was done protecting my father from the truth. The lie had been spoken out loud, in front of everyone. It was time for the truth to have its turn. I didn't know what that would look like, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that a change was coming. The notice had been served, not by a lawyer, but by my own father. My notice that I was done playing my part. The following Monday felt like the beginning of a new, unsettling era. The office, usually a place of predictable routine, was charged with a strange energy. Mark arrived late, striding in like he owned the world, which, in his mind, he now did. He called an impromptu staff meeting in the small conference room. My father was there, ostensibly to help with the transition, but mostly he just sat in the corner, beaming at his son. Mark stood at the head of the table, talking about new horizons and aggressive growth strategies. He used a lot of buzzwords he'd probably learned from a podcast. Synergy, disruption, paradigm shift. Our crew, a collection of grizzled foremen and practical project managers, looked at him with a mixture of confusion and skepticism. These were men who understood concrete and steel, not corporate jargon. We're not just a construction company anymore. In his memories. Look at this, Anna, he said, holding up a picture of him and a much younger Mark wearing matching hard hats. He was a natural from the start. Always so fearless. I glanced at the picture. I remembered that day. I had been there too, just out of frame. I had been the one who packed the lunches and made sure they both had sunscreen. Always present. Always invisible. Dad, I need you to look at the quarterly tax payment, I said, trying to bring him back to the present. Give it to Mark, he said, waving a dismissive hand. He's in charge of all that now. I need to focus on clearing this stuff out. I went to Mark's office. He was on the phone, laughing loudly, one foot propped up on the desk that had been our father's for 40 years. I stood in the doorway, waiting. He finally hung up. What's up, sis? He asked, not bothering to move his foot. I have the quarterly tax forms. They need to be signed and filed by Friday, I said. Just put them on the corner of the desk, he said, already turning his attention to his computer screen. I'll get to it. I hesitated. Mark, they're important. If we're late, the penalties are steep. I said I'll get to it, he repeated, his tone sharp with irritation. Don't you have some numbers to crunch or something? I left the forms on his desk and went back to my own small office, a converted supply closet at the back of the building. I felt a growing sense of dread. For years, I had been the failsafe. I made sure things like this got done. Now, I was supposed to just hand them over and trust him. But I didn't trust him. Not with a stack of papers, and certainly not with our family's entire legacy. The rest of the day was quiet. Too quiet. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept replaying the scene at the party, my father's speech, Mark's smug smile. The injustice of it all was a constant low-grade hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. Late in the afternoon, the mail arrived. It was the usual stack of bills, invoices, and junk mail. But there was one envelope that stood out. It was a large, stiff, white envelope sent via certified mail. It was addressed to the company, were clear. The company had failed to make the last 3 monthly payments on the loan. The total amount in arrears was staggering. We were in breach of our loan covenants. The bank was demanding immediate payment of the overdue amount, plus fees and penalties, within 10 business days. If we failed to pay, they would initiate foreclosure proceedings. My hands started to shake. This was impossible. Utterly impossible. I handled the accounts payable. I scheduled the payments. I personally set up the automatic transfer for that loan payment every single month. It was the first and most important bill we paid. I had seen the debits on our statements. The money had been leaving our account. I pulled up our online banking portal, my heart pounding in my chest. I went back through the statements for the last 3 months. There they were, just as I remembered. 3 large transfers to the bank, on the first of each month, for the exact amount of the loan payment. The money had gone out. So why was the bank saying they never received it? I looked closer at the transaction details. The destination account number. It wasn't our loan account number. It was off by a few digits. I stared at the screen, a cold, sickening realization dawning on me. The automatic payment hadn't been going to the bank. It had been rerouted. Someone had gone into our system and changed the destination account number for our largest, most critical monthly payment. There were only 3 people with the administrative access to do that: my father, me, and Mark. My father barely knew how to check his email. I certainly hadn't done it. That left only one person. I printed out the bank statement and the notice of default. My hands were steady now, fueled by a surge of cold, clear anger. I walked out of my office and down the short hall to the large corner office that now belonged to Mark. The door was closed. I didn't bother to knock. I pushed the door open. He was on his phone again, scrolling through some social media app, his feet still on the desk. He looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "I'm busy, Anna," he said. I walked over to the desk and slapped the papers down in front of him. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. He glanced down at the notice, his expression barely flickering. He gave a little laugh, a tremor in his hand as he reached for the papers. He was a terrible liar when he was cornered. "This isn't a clerical error, Mark," I said, my voice like ice. I looked at the statements. The money left our account every month, but it didn't go to the loan. It went to a different account, an account that you changed in the system. His face went pale. The condescending smirk vanished, replaced by a cornered animal look of panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Don't you?" I pressed, leaning over the desk, invading his space. "The payments have been diverted for 3 months. That's a lot of money, Mark. The bank wants it back. They want it back in 10 days. So I'm going to ask you again. Where did the money go?" He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. He tried to reclaim his authority, puffing out his chest. "Listen, you don't understand the complexities of this. This is big boy stuff, Anna. It's about cash flow and leveraging assets. You stick to your spreadsheets and let me handle the business strategy." The sheer audacity of his words, the casual, ingrained sexism of it, snapped something inside me. All the years of being patted on the head, of being told I was good with the details while he handled the big picture, coalesced into a single point of white-hot rage. "The big boy stuff is about to get us thrown out onto the street," I shot back, my voice echoing in the quiet office. "My spreadsheets are the only thing that can prove you've been stealing from this company, from your own family. So you're going to tell me where that money is, right now, or I'm walking into Dad's office and showing him every single one of these papers." The threat hung in the air between us. We both knew it was the nuclear option. Showing our father would break his heart. It would destroy the perfect image he had of his perfect son. And for a moment, I saw real fear in Mark's eyes. He licked his lips, his mind racing. "It wasn't stealing," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "It was borrowing. I had an investment opportunity, a sure thing. I was going to put the money back before anyone even noticed. With interest, we were going to be rich." "An investment opportunity?" I asked, incredulous. "You took the money we used to pay fraud." A reckless, selfish boy playing with things he didn't understand. "You're not going to fix anything," I said, my decision made. "You're not going to make any more calls." You're not going to touch another dollar of this company's money. From now on, I'm handling it." I gathered the papers from his desk. As I turned to leave, he looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "You can't tell Dad," he whispered. "It'll kill him." I paused at the door, my back to him. "He should have thought of that before he put his own father's legacy on the line for a sure thing," I said. I walked out, leaving him alone in the office that was supposed to be his kingdom, now the scene of his downfall. I didn't know how I was going to fix this mess, but I knew one thing for sure. The era of Mark was over. The era of truth was just beginning. That night, the office was silent except for the low hum of the computers. I had sent everyone home, telling them I needed to work late on year-end projections. My father had left hours ago, humming to himself, oblivious to the storm that was gathering. I was alone, with a pot of stale coffee and a mountain of financial records. I had to find out where the money had really gone. Mark's story about a sure-thing investment felt flimsy. It was the kind of vague excuse he'd used his whole life. I needed concrete proof. I started with the diverted payments. I traced the account number where the loan money had been sent. It was an account with a different bank, a smaller, regional one. Getting information on it would be impossible without a subpoena, but I didn't need to see inside the account. I just needed to know who owned it. I started digging through Mark's desk. It was a mess of takeout menus, golf magazines, and unopened mail. In the bottom drawer, tucked under a stack of old blueprints, I found it. A checkbook. The name on the checks wasn't Mark's. It was for a business I had never heard of. Apex Solutions, LLC. The account number on the checks matched the one the loan payments had been diverted to. An LLC, a limited liability company. That was smart. It created a layer of separation. I immediately went online to the state's Corporate Commission website. I searched through all of our payment records for the last 6 months, looking for any other payments made to Apex Solutions. I found them, a lot of them. They were disguised as payments to a new subcontractor. The invoices were vague, listing services like consulting fees, strategic planning, and market analysis. The amounts were large and irregular, tens of thousands of dollars at a time. This was bigger than just the 3 missed loan payments. This was systematic embezzlement. My stomach churned. I felt sick. How could he do this? To our father, who had given him everything. To our employees, who depended on this company for their livelihoods. To me. I printed out every fake invoice, every corresponding bank transfer. The pile of paper on my desk grew, a physical manifestation of his betrayal. As I stared at the damning evidence, another thought occurred to me. If he was this calculating, this deceitful, was this all he had done? The vague consulting fees seemed like an easy way to steal, but the amounts were huge. It was too much to go unnoticed for long. He had to have a way to justify the expense, to make it look like the company was getting something for its money. I started looking at our recent projects. About 4 months ago, we had completed a big one, a new commercial building for a mid-sized tech company, Franklin Corporation. It was our most profitable project of the year, according to the numbers Mark had presented to my father. Mark had been the project lead. He had handled everything, from bidding to client relations to material procurement. My father had been so proud, calling it Mark's first big win. I pulled the file for the Franklin Corporation project. I started going through the material requisitions and purchase orders. It was a slow, painstaking process. I compared our suppliers' invoices with the amounts Mark had approved for payment. At first, everything seemed to be in order. Then I found it. A discrepancy. A large order for high-grade structural steel. The invoice was from our usual trusted supplier, but the payment hadn't gone to them. It had been paid to Apex Solutions. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. He wouldn't. He had submitted a purchase order from a real supplier, but he'd paid his own shell company, which meant the real supplier never delivered the high-grade steel. So what had he used for the lives at risk? For what? A new car? A fancy vacation? To fund some stupid investment scheme? When I finally composed myself, I went back to my desk. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. This was out of my hands. This was bigger than a family dispute. This required more than just a confrontation. I felt completely, utterly alone. I couldn't go to my father. The shock would be too much for him. I couldn't go to my mother. She would just try to smooth it over, to make excuses for Mark. I needed to talk to someone sane, someone outside the immediate blast zone. I picked up my phone and dialed my Aunt Carol. She was my father's younger sister, a retired accountant who had always been sharp as a tack. She had moved away years ago, but we stayed in touch. She had always seen through Mark's charm. She answered on the second ring. "Anna? Is everything all right? It's late there." My voice trembled as I spoke. "Aunt Carol, I need some advice. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't bring myself to say the words embezzlement or fraud out loud yet. I kept it vague. I'm worried about the company," I said. "I found some financial irregularities. Some things that don't add up." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was grave. "I'm not surprised, dear," she said softly. "I've been worried for years." "You have?" I asked, surprised. "Of course," she said. "Your father has always had a blind spot when it comes to Mark. He sees the son he wants to see, not the man who is actually there. He pours money and praise on him, hoping it will magically make him responsible. But it doesn't work that way. It just makes him reckless." Hearing her say it, hearing my own secret thoughts spoken aloud by someone else, was an incredible relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just the jealous sister. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Dad just retired. He handed everything over to Mark. He thinks everything is perfect." "Your father loves the story of the prodigal son who becomes the king," Aunt Carol said. "But he never stops to think about the other child, the one family. You always have been. Your father may not see it, but I do." We talked for another hour. She didn't press me for details, but she gave me solid, practical advice. She told me to find a good lawyer, someone who wasn't connected to the family. She told me to be prepared for the fallout, that the truth would be ugly and painful for everyone. But she also told me that I was doing the right thing, that I was the only one who could stop the bleeding. When I hung up the phone, the office felt a little less lonely. The path ahead was terrifying, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking it completely by myself. I had a purpose. I wasn't just trying to save the company anymore. I was trying to save my father from the consequences of his own blindness. And I was going to do it by exposing the son he idolized for the criminal he truly was. I spent the rest of the night making copies, saving files to a personal flash drive, and building the case that would tear my family apart in order to save it. The next few days were a blur of clandestine activity. By day, I was the quiet, efficient office manager, going about my duties with a forced calm. I processed payroll, answered phones, and nodded politely as Mark strode around the office, barking orders and talking about his grand vision for the future. He was acting as if our confrontation had never happened, a classic Mark move. If he ignored a problem long enough, he believed it would simply cease to exist. He was a master of denial. But at night, after everyone had gone home, I became a forensic accountant. I locked my office door, pulled out my hidden files, and continued to dig. Every night, the hole got deeper. The Apex Solutions fraud was the worst of it, but it wasn't the only thing. I found padded expense reports, personal purchases disguised as business costs, and fuel card records that showed Mark's car being filled up multiple times a day in different towns, a clear sign he was letting his friends use the company card. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. He was bleeding the company dry from every possible vein. I followed Aunt Carol's advice and made copies of everything. I had a flash drive with scanned documents and spreadsheets that I kept in my purse at all times. I also had a physical folder of the most damning evidence hidden in the trunk of my car. Was taking a private family matter and making it public. But the potential danger outweighed my reluctance. I took a deep breath and dialed his number. "Dave Miller," a gruff voice answered. "Mr. Miller, my name is Anna," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm calling from the construction company that built your new facility. I'm reviewing some project files and I have a few questions about the material specifications." There was a cautious pause on the other end. "I thought your brother Mark handled all of that," he said. "He was our point of contact." "He was," I confirmed. "But I'm in charge of internal auditing, and I've found some discrepancies in the paperwork for the structural steel. I'm just trying to ensure that everything is up to the standards we promised." The silence on the other end stretched on. I could hear him breathing, thinking. I was afraid he was going to hang up, to dismiss me as some low-level drone. "Look," he finally said, his voice lower now. "Off the record, we had some concerns." My heart leaped. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Some of our guys on site, the ones who were there during the build, they thought the steel looked off, a little flimsy. They mentioned it to your brother. And what did Mark say? He said it was a new alloy, lighter but stronger, top-of-the-line stuff. He assured us it exceeded all the code requirements. He showed us the engineering specs and everything seemed to check out. Of course he did. He would have faked the specs, too." "Mr. Miller," I said, making a decision, "I have reason to believe the materials used were not the ones specified in your contract. I have invoices that show payment for a lower-grade product. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this before it becomes a major issue for both our companies." There was another long pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he calculated the risk of getting involved versus the risk of ignoring a potential structural failure in his new building. We had our own independent inspector take a look," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "After your crew had left. We had him take some core samples from a few of the support beams." My blood ran cold. "And what did his report say?" "It wasn't good," Dave said, his voice heavy. "The steel's tensile strength was supplier mix-up. He swore he'd make it right. He offered us a massive discount on our next phase of expansion and promised to cover the full cost of the reinforcements, no questions asked. He made us sign a non-disclosure agreement. It all clicked into place. That was where the embezzled money was going. Not just to fund his lifestyle, but to pay for his cover-ups. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, digging the hole deeper and deeper with every lie. "Mr. Miller, I need a copy of that report," I said. "And I need you to be willing to talk to my father's lawyer." "I don't know," he hedged. "We signed an NDA. An NDA obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation is not enforceable," I said, repeating a line I had read online during my late-night research. "He lied to you about a supplier mix-up. This was a deliberate act to defraud your company and endanger your employees. If something happens to that building, and it comes out that you knew about the structural issues and stayed quiet, you and your company will be held liable. Working with me is the only way to protect yourself." I let the threat hang in the air. It was a gamble, but it was the only card I had to play. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he sighed. "Fine," he said. "I'll email it to your personal address." But this conversation never happened. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," I said, relief washing over me. "You're doing the right thing." When I hung up, I felt a profound shift. I now had the smoking gun. A third-party, independent engineering report that confirmed Mark's criminal fraud. This was no longer just about money. It was about public safety. It was about the integrity of my family's name, a name my grandfather and father had spent a lifetime building. That evening, I tried to approach my father. I found him in the living room, watching a golf tournament on television. He seemed so happy, so relaxed. The weight of the company had been lifted from his shoulders, and he was basking in the glow of a well-deserved retirement. I hated what I was about to do to him. "Dad?" I said softly, sitting on the ottoman in front of his armchair. "Anna," he said, smiling. "Come to watch the game with your old man?" "Not exactly," I said. "Dad, leadership. Is he?" I challenged, my own frustration boiling over. "Or is he just telling you what you want to hear?" "Dad, please, just listen to me. I have proof that—" "I don't want to see your proof," he snapped, his voice rising. "I've seen your proof before. A spreadsheet that's off by a few dollars. An expense report you don't like. You're so focused on the tiny details that you can't see the big picture. Mark is landing contracts my best salesman couldn't touch. He's expanding our reputation. That's what matters. It doesn't matter if the whole company is a house of cards," I cried, my voice cracking. "He's running it into the ground. He's lying to you." "That's enough," he roared, standing up. He was a big man, and when he was angry, he filled the room. "I will not have you speak about your brother that way in my house." "It's jealousy, Anna. That's all it is. You're jealous of his success. I thought you were better than that." The accusation hit me harder than a slap. Jealousy. It was such a simple, easy explanation for him. It allowed him to dismiss my concerns, to avoid looking at the ugly truth. It protected his perfect world, his perfect son. "You're wrong, Dad," I said, my voice a hollow whisper. "You're so wrong." I stood up and walked out of the room, his angry words following me down the hall. I went to my bedroom and closed the door, my body trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. He wouldn't listen. He was so blinded by his love for Mark that he was willing to believe I was a petty, jealous shrew, rather than entertain the possibility that his golden boy was a fraud. I sat on the edge of my bed, the folder of evidence feeling like a lead weight in my bag. There was only one way to do this. I couldn't just tell him. I couldn't just warn him. I had to confront him with irrefutable, undeniable proof. I had to shatter the illusion so completely that he would have no choice but to see the truth. My mother had planned a small family dinner for the following Saturday. Just the four of us. She called it a passing of the torch celebration, a formal acknowledgement of the transition. It was meant to be a quiet, intimate affair. It was the perfect stage for my nights organizing my evidence into a single, devastating narrative. I created a folder. On the top was the notice of default from the bank. Behind that, the bank statements showing the diverted payments. Then, the corporate filing for Apex Solutions, linking it to his lawyer friend. After that, a thick stack of the fake invoices, cross-referenced with the real project files. And at the very back, the final, undeniable piece of proof, a printed copy of the independent engineering report on the Franklin Corp building with the damning conclusions about the substandard steel highlighted in yellow. It was a story of greed, deceit, and criminal negligence, told in black and white. On Saturday evening, I got dressed with methodical care. I chose a simple, severe black dress. I felt like I was preparing for a funeral. In a way, I was. The funeral of my family as I knew it. When I came downstairs, my mother was buzzing around the dining room, adjusting candles and polishing silverware. She had made my father's favorite meal, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. The scene was so painfully normal it felt surreal. "Oh, Anna, you look lovely," she said, her smile not quite hiding the anxiety in her eyes. She knew there was tension between me and Mark, but she was determined to pretend it didn't exist. "I'm so glad we're doing this. It's important for your father to see you two supporting each other." I didn't answer. I just helped her carry the dishes to the table. My father and Mark came down a few minutes later. My father was wearing a tie, something he rarely did at home. Mark was dressed in an expensive suit, looking every bit the young executive. He was carrying a bottle of champagne. "A toast!" he declared, popping the cork with a flourish. "To Dad, on his well-earned retirement. And to the future of the company." He poured 4 glasses. My father beamed, raising his glass high. "To the future," he echoed, his eyes fixed on Mark. My mother murmured her agreement. I picked up my glass but didn't drink. Dinner was excruciating. My father and Mark dominated the conversation, reminiscing about old times and making grand plans for the future. They talked about new equipment, new markets, new developments. It was all a fantasy, a conversation happening in a world that no longer existed. I sat. "We need to talk about the truth." "What truth is that?" Mark sneered. "That you can't stand to see me succeed?" That was it. That was the moment. I reached down and picked up the folder. I placed it on the center of the dining room table with a soft but definitive thud. This truth, I said. The three of them stared at the plain manila folder as if it were a venomous snake. What is this? My father asked, his voice tight with suspicion. More of your spreadsheets? You could call it that, I said. Why don't you open it, Dad? He looked from the folder to my face, then to Mark's. Mark was trying to look nonchalant, but a muscle was twitching in his jaw. My mother just looked terrified, her hands clasped in her lap. With a deep sigh of irritation, my father reached out and opened the folder. The first page was the notice of default. He scanned it, his brow furrowed. I told you about this, Dad, Mark said quickly, trying to get ahead of it. It's a clerical error from the bank. Anna is blowing it way out of proportion. It's already being handled. Is it? I asked calmly. Then you won't mind explaining the next page. Go on, Dad. Turn the page. My father flipped to the next sheet, the bank statement with the 3 large payments highlighted, showing the incorrect destination account number. He stared at it for a long moment, confusion warring with dawning suspicion on his face. The money went out, he said, half to himself, but to the wrong account. It wasn't the wrong account, Dad, I said. It was the right account for Mark's purposes. He changed it in the system. That's a lie, Mark blustered, his face turning red. She's making this up. She's trying to frame me. Am I? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Turn the page, Dad. The next page was the corporate filing for Apex Solutions. My father read the name of the registered agent, Mark's friend Todd. His eyes flickered toward Mark, a flicker of genuine doubt entering them for the first time. What is Apex Solutions? He asked, his voice low. It's a consultant, Mark insisted, his voice getting louder, more desperate. For market expansion. A new venture. I was going to surprise you. A surprise? I whispered. Is this true? No, she's twisting things, Mark pleaded, his eyes darting between our parents. It was for company expenses. Legitimate expenses. I decided it was time for the final, fatal blow. Then maybe you can explain the last page, Mark, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. Go on, Dad. The very last page. My father's trembling hands turned to the final document. It was the engineering report. He saw the Franklin Corporation letterhead. He saw the title. Report on Structural Integrity Analysis. He saw the highlighted sentences. Substandard materials. Compromised tensile strength. Risk of catastrophic failure. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by my mother's quiet sob. My father read the page. Then he read it again. He slowly lifted his head, and the look in his eyes was something I will never forget. It was the look of a man whose entire world had just been burned to the ground. The love, the pride, the blind adoration he had always felt for his son was gone, replaced by a horrifying, bottomless abyss of betrayal. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, to look at Mark. His voice, when he spoke, was a strangled, broken whisper. You put people in danger? He asked, the words barely audible. You built a building that could fall down and kill people? You stole from me? From this family? Mark just stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. The evidence was too complete, too overwhelming. There were no more lies he could tell. He finally stammered, I was going to fix it. I was going to pay it all back. The investment was about to pay off. You don't understand the pressure I was under. My father pushed his chair back violently, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He stood up, his whole body trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air. Pressure? He roared, his voice a raw wound of pain and fury. You don't know the meaning of the word. I built this company from nothing, with my own 2 hands. I went without so you could have everything. I gave you my name, my reputation, my legacy. And you— Get out! My father bellowed, the sound echoing through the house like a thunderclap. Get out of my house! And don't you ever come back! Mark stumbled backward, his face a mask of shock and terror. He looked at our mother, but she just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. Then he turned and fled, practically running from the room. A moment later, we heard the front door slam shut, the sound sealing the end of an era. My father sank back into his chair, his body slumping as if the strings holding him up had been cut. He dropped his head into his hands, and his broad shoulders began to shake with deep, ragged sobs. My mother rushed to his side, trying to comfort him, but he was inconsolable. I stood there, watching the wreckage. I had done it. I had told the truth, and it had destroyed everything. But as I looked at the folder on the table, I knew that the truth, however painful, was better than the beautiful, rotten lie we had been living. The fever had finally broken. The days that followed the disastrous dinner were quiet and surreal. The house was shrouded in a heavy silence, the kind that follows a great and terrible storm. My father didn't leave his study for 3 days. My mother tiptoed around the house, her face etched with grief, occasionally trying to talk to me about forgiveness and family, but her heart wasn't in it. She was in shock, mourning the loss of the perfect family she thought she had. Mark was gone. He had cleared out his apartment, leaving no forwarding address. His phone went straight to voicemail. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. I knew he was just hiding, waiting for the storm to pass, expecting our mother to eventually wear our father down. But this time was different. The betrayal was too deep, the crime too severe. On the 4th day, my father emerged from his study. He looked 10 years older. His eyes were hollow, but there was a new, hard resolve in them. He walked into the kitchen where I was making coffee and sat down at the table. "We need to call Robert Evans," he said, his voice raspy. Robert Evans was—
Embezzlement is a family matter, if you choose to keep it that way. But the Franklin Corp situation? That's criminal fraud and reckless endangerment. You have a massive liability issue here. If that building fails, the company is finished, and you could be held personally responsible. My father flinched as if he'd been struck. "But I didn't know," he said, his voice pleading. "Mark handled that whole project." "It won't matter," Mr. Evans said bluntly. "Your name is on the door. The buck stops with you. We need to get ahead of this. Now." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of damage control. Under Mr. Evans's guidance, we proactively contacted the bank and Franklin Corp. I was the one who made the calls, who sat in the meetings. I presented our plan. We would make the bank whole. We would pay for the reinforcements on the Franklin building, and we would do whatever it took to make things right. It was humiliating and expensive, but it was the only way. My father, for his part, receded into the background. He trusted my judgment completely now. He signed whatever I put in front of him, approved whatever I recommended. The dynamic between us had been irrevocably altered. He was the figurehead. I was the one in charge. We worked out of the company office, which felt eerily empty without Mark's loud, boisterous presence. My father took over his old office again, but it felt different. He spent most of his time just sitting there, staring out the window. One afternoon, I found him there, looking at that old photo of him and a young Mark in their hard hats. "I was so blind," he said, his voice thick with regret. He didn't turn to look at me. I wanted him to be me, but better. Bolder. More successful. I pushed him so hard, I gave him so much. I think I made him this way. "No, Dad," I said, coming to stand beside him. "You didn't make him this way. He made his own choices. You just made it easy for him to get away with them." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a deep, aching sorrow. "He's not like me at all, is he?" "No," I said softly. "You are," he whispered. Collapse eventually. You just stopped it from taking your father down with it. How is he? He's broken, I admitted. But he'll heal. We both will. My mother was the last holdout of the old regime. She cornered me in the kitchen one evening, her face a mixture of grief and recrimination. Your brother called me, she said, her voice trembling. He's staying with a friend. He's devastated. He's lost everything. I just looked at her, my expression unyielding. Has he? I asked. Or has he just finally been forced to face the consequences of his own actions? He made a mistake, Anna, she pleaded. A terrible mistake. But he's your brother. This family is broken. We have to find a way to fix it. He didn't make a mistake, Mom, I said, my voice hard. He committed fraud and embezzlement. He endangered people's lives. That's not a mistake. That's a series of choices. Deliberate, selfish choices. But he's your brother. She began again, her voice trailing off. And I'm your daughter, I interrupted, my voice rising with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I'm the one saving this family, not him. I'm the one negotiating with the banks. I'm the one working 12-hour days to pull this company back from the brink of bankruptcy. I will not cover for him anymore. I will not make excuses for him. That part of my life is over. She stared at me, shocked into silence by my vehemence. She had never seen this side of me. She was used to the quiet, accommodating Anna. That Anna was gone for good. I had set a new boundary, and I would not let her, or anyone else, cross it. The months that followed were hard. We had to sell off some assets to cover the debts and the cost of the Franklin Corporation repairs. We had to downsize our staff, but we survived. The company, though smaller, was now stable. It was solvent. It was honest. I was at the helm. My official title was president. My father came into the office a few days a week, but he acted more as a consultant, an advisor. He was content to let me lead. We found a new rhythm, a new kind of partnership based on mutual respect. It wasn't the retirement he had envisioned, but in a strange way, it was better. It was real. We never heard from Mark directly. My mother had chosen so many years ago. It had been tarnished, almost destroyed, but it was still standing. Because of me. I thought back to that night at the retirement party, to my father's proud, booming voice. I knew I could only count on you. He had been looking at the wrong child. He had praised the charming facade, while the real foundation stood silently in the shadows. He was wrong about who he could count on, but he was right about one thing. He could count on Mark to be exactly who he was, a charming, reckless boy who would always choose the easy way out. And he could count on me to be the one to finally show him the truth. The price of that truth had been high, but the cost of the lie would have been so much higher. They had finally learned what it feels like to be small, and I had finally learned what it felt like to stand tall.